So, so what we have here now, after our last discussion, after the hammer fell and the hammer hit, the hammer hitting was the entire Confederacy has seceded. Now, there's a difference between the Confederacy or the Confederate States and the Southern states, right? There's several Southern states that don't secede, and so there are Union slave states. They're in the South, but they remain loyal to the Union. Those are called border states, all right? And they're all in yellow here on your map, okay? So those remain part of the Union, and yet they're slave states, Union slave states, all right? But everything that's purple and pink here, those are all going to become the Confederate States of America. They just declare themselves independent. They just give themselves a new name and give themselves a new government, and they have a president. They have a Congress. They have a capital, and all that. Okay, so so where do you think the capital of the South is going to be? Where, if you just thinking what we know about the South, where would you think the capital of the South would be? Maggie? Maryland. Not Maryland. Because, no, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said the South, and that's imprecise. Where do you think the capital of the Confederacy is going to be? That's what I need to say. Where do you think the capital of the Confederate States of America would be? Luke?
North Carolina.
North Carolina? Why North Carolina?
Weren't they the first ones to secede, or is that South?
South Carolina. South Carolina. So that would be a good guess because South Carolina wants to be the Southeast, right? Stephen?
Virginia?
Virginia. Why Virginia?
Because it's like the older brother, the first one of all of them.
Okay, so that's like the older brother, more stable and reliable, right? So they're, it's kind of like whose idea is it going to be to run away from home? Well, the middle child, he's going to come up with that idea, right? Because he's going to be the one that's like, oh no, our allowance has just been raised. Let us unite and rebel, right? And they're just going to be all dramatic, right? Now, they're going to have to convince the older brother that that's the right thing to do, because the older brother is kind of like I don't know, that doesn't sound like a wise thing to do. We don't have any way to feed ourselves or to house ourselves. Like, run away from home sounds like a horrible idea, right? But then eventually they convince him, hey, no, it's going to be okay, because we're going to be, okay? So who's going to be really in charge once they actually run away from home, right? Who's going to be the one who actually figures out what they're going to eat and where they stay? It's going to be the oldest brother, right? So the middle brother is going to come up with the idea to leave. The oldest brother is going to be the one who's leading once they leave. And so that's why Virginia makes the most sense, right? Virginia is sort of by default the leader of the South. The South culture comes from there, and they sort of have this default prestige and standing among the South. That's why some of the reasons we've called them the oldest brother. So yes, Richmond, Virginia will be the capital of the Confederacy for the majority of its existence. A little bit of a spoiler alert: the Confederate States of America don't exist still. They're gone. They're like, this is a short-lived country. It's not a very long life that it has, right? So I realize that might kind of spoil a little bit of the, like, because you're like, oh man, but okay. So once they've broken off, and then once Confederates have fired on Union soldiers, and that happens where? Where does that happen first? Fort Sumter. Okay. Once that happens, there is war. Declaration of war is a response to Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter's a spark. Now, there was already a powder keg there. Right? There was already everything in the makings of war, and Fort Sumter just kind of made it, kind of set it off, set it ablaze. So now we're at war, and one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to sit down and we're going to ask ourselves, what's going to be our approach? How do we win this war? Okay. What does the South have to do in order to win? Like, what do they want? What does the South want? Yeah.
More states?
No. Not more states. Yes?
Slaves.
They want slaves, right? Good. They want slaves. And so, what do they need in order to keep their slaves? Now, whether they actually need this or not, right? What do they need in order to keep their slaves? Now, remember that the Confederacy are their own country, right? What percentage of the Congress of the Confederate States of America are pro-slavery? What percentage of that Congress are pro-slavery? 100%. Right? They're all slave states. All of the Confederacy are all slave states. All of their congressmen are all pro-slavery. Whether or not they represent the majority of their people, that's a different issue. But certainly all the congressmen are pro-slavery. So what do they need in order to win this war? They already have slavery, right, in their Congress. What do they need to do in order to win it?
An army?
Yeah, they need an army. How will they know if they won? Yeah.
If the North says that we'll have slaves.
Right. The North can't. The North's a different country, so the North can't make laws for them. Yeah.
If the North invites them back in.
No, actually, they don't want to be invited back in. For them, winning is the North going away. All they need winning is just getting to exist. The North leaving them alone. Okay? What the North needs in order to win is, this might have been helpful to start here. Like the North wants the South back, right? That's what the North wants. The North wants the South back. The North is fighting to save the Union, right? What they're fighting for is to save the Union. And let's keep this very clear, that when the war begins, the war is not about slavery, okay? The war is about union, right? When the war begins, the war is not about slavery, it's about the Union. It's about keeping these states in the United States, all right? Now, it is about slavery because why do these states want to leave? To keep slavery, okay? So, it is about slavery, but the North is not fighting the war in order to free slaves, okay? The North is not fighting the war in order to free slaves. They're not fighting a war to end slavery. They're fighting a war to keep union. Okay, does that make sense? Everybody got that? Mm-hmm. Let's all repeat that after me. The North is fighting to keep the Union.
The North is fighting to keep the Union.
Good. Now, let's add that to a bigger sentence that we need. When the Civil War begins, say that.
When the Civil War begins.
The North is fighting to keep the Union.
The North is fighting to keep the Union.
Good. All right. So, if the North wins, the South becomes part of the United States again. The Confederate States become part of the United States again. If the South wins, they get left alone. All right? So, one of those is an easier victory to achieve, right? What do you think the South's strategy is going to be? Yeah.
Focus mainly on defense.
Yeah. They're going to be purely defensive. What do you think the North's strategy would be? Yeah.
Offensive.
Offensive, right? Now, how? How do we want to? What do we want to do to the South? Now, here's where going back to their economy becomes pretty important, right? What does the South have a lot of?
Cotton.
Have a lot of cotton. Good. And what do they not have a lot of? Along those lines, what do they not have a lot of? Yeah?
Industry.
They don't have a lot of industry. Very good. So this means that what the South has a lot of is stuff. What they don't have a lot of are things. Okay? So Nolan, you're new to us, but stuff stands for raw materials. Okay? Stuff would be like iron ore, lumber, cotton, corn, whatever. Okay, corn's a bad example because it doesn't really need to be processed. Well, unless you're America today, it doesn't need to be processed in order to be consumed. But all these other things, iron ore, lumber, cotton, they all need to be manufactured. They all need to be turned into things. Okay, things are manufactured products, and manufactured goods. Okay, stuff is the stuff you make things out of. Okay, so the South has a lot of stuff. They don't have a way of making those into things, and so what's absolutely critical for the South's survival is getting those things. Where are they going to get those things from? Yeah.
The North spaces in the South.
No. Well, because the North is just going to say, nope, can't have it, right? So where they used to get their stuff from, or their things from, they used to get their things from the North. So the first thing is the North is just going to say, well, let's stop selling stuff to, or things to them, right? We're just, so when the South comes and says, we don't have factories in order to make rifles. Hey, North, can we buy some rifles off of you, right? Let me think about that. Nah. So where are they going to get their things? Yes. Yeah, right. You got to go across the pond. And so any things that you're going to bring in, like rifles, like tents, uniforms, swords, gunpowder, all of those things that need to be manufactured, they're going to have to bring in from Europe, which means they're getting into there. How? How are they going to get those things from Europe into the South, into the Confederacy? Yeah, boats. All right. So what is the first thing the North wants to do? Blockade. Okay, so the North's strategy is called what? What do they call it? You read this. What's the name of their plan, their war plan? It's a very creative name. All right, so what they want to do is they want to cut off the supply of things. They want to cut off their they want to suffocate them, right? Right? They want to suffocate them. And so they're going to name themselves after a snake that suffocates its victim. Oh, not that. Yeah. Not a boa. In this case, an anaconda. So they call it the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan is the name of the South strategy. Okay? And here's an old-timey picture. It's called Scott's Great Snake because Winfield Scott was the guy who came up with this. He is a general at this time, old general, old fuss and feathers. By this point he could no longer mount his horse because he was so old and large, but he's still kicking. So this guy was around during the War of 1812, all right, and was actually a big deal in the Mexican War, and now he's heading the Union strategy of the Civil War. So that's Winfield Scott. All right, so their idea is we're going to surround them. So that's going to involve, certainly it's going to involve blockading, naval blockades all around their southern ports, right? Like your Charleston, like your North Carolinian ports, certainly Chesapeake Bay, okay? Chesapeake Bay is going to be pretty important, right? Because that's access to the yes.
I thought Maryland was part of the Union.
It is. Oh, Chesapeake doesn't touch. Well, does it? Because doesn't the James runs into the? Yeah. So maybe not like the Chesapeake Bay like has Maryland on both sides, and maybe none of the Chesapeake Bay actually has Virginia on it. Does it? I feel like this is not gonna. Yeah, so you can kind of. Oh, you can't see it because that didn't zoom for you. But this part right here. Okay, so those ports there, and I don't know which cities are along that coast, but that's what we're looking for. What we're looking to blockade, and I keep going over that one. I don't want to. Mobile Bay is going to be really significant port, but that's not it. It doesn't end just with this. Whoa, Guthrie! It doesn't just end with this that coastline out here, right? Because they're also going to get supplies up their rivers, and so the Mississippi becomes a very important part of that blockade. So if the snake's going to go around, this is where this is horribly inaccurate, because they're not going to like surround Texas and all that stuff. It makes for a better picture, but by cutting this off, they're getting this main way that all of these supplies are going to get to Louisiana and Arkansas, and by extension that are going to get into Texas. And they're cutting off these states from these states by doing that as well. So it goes up the Mississippi and actually goes into like the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers as well. So that's going to just cut off all the water. If you can control the water, then they have no way of getting any things, and they're going to run out of ammo. They're going to run out of guns. They're going to run out of uniforms. And they're probably going to run out of food too, because they're super agricultural, right? But remember, they're not here to grow and sell stuff, right? They're here to grow and sell something, right? They're here to grow and sell. What crop is it that makes the most money? And what crop is it that makes the most money right now? Cotton. So, when you're going to fight a war, when you're like, hey, what's one thing we have, right? We've got cotton. It's not the most menacing thing to offer, right? Hey, we're getting ready to fight a war. What's our greatest natural resource? It's this really soft, fluffy stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah, we could throw seeds at it. Right, so it's not super menacing, and so all we really have to do, this is the Northern theory, is just cut them off, and so that's called the Anaconda Plan. Now, the South's plan, if the North's plan is called the Anaconda Plan, the South's plan is the Armadillo Plan. Okay? What we want to do as the South is we just want to curl up like an armadillo, and the enemy's going to come up to the armadillo, and it's going to like sniff around at it and bat it back and forth, and maybe try to take a few bites and be like, oh, that's really hard, ow, and then hopefully just walk away. That's how armadillos approach life, all right? And so it doesn't work out so well when the prey is a Chevy, as we all can see. But it works well in the wild, because clearly there are enough of them around. So that's what the South wants to do, right? Because they don't need to win anything. They don't need to get anything from the North. All they want is for the North to let them be the Confederate States of America. Because if they're the Confederate States of America, then they have an easy 100% majority of pro-slavery legislatures. So that's all they want. Okay? So I've got your handout. We're gonna look at some examples of this, and that's why you had on your handout you have an armadillo and you have an anaconda. Just trust me, that snake is an anaconda. And you got some place within and below them to take notes. So we'll look at some examples of how this worked out, how these things work themselves out in some battles, and some. Yeah, and it is front and back because, but. Yeah, so leave the don't get all excited and be like, I want to color rainbows on my armadillo. There's space inside the armadillo so that you can write in the armadillo there, and in the snake there where it's curled around that. But you can write below it as well. Whatever. So, now, one of the things that we need to understand before before we get started looking at the armadillo and the anaconda and looking at the war itself, we need to go back because one of the most important events in the war for changing the course of the war is going to depend on some things that had happened before the war. Okay, one of those things we mentioned very briefly, and we want to kind of bring back up here, and that is the Fugitive Slave Act, which was part of the Compromise of 1850. Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act means, so a fugitive is a runaway, right? That you have the fugae is flight. Right? And so there's a little bit of Latin vocabulary that you have to learn in history class. But so a fugitive is somebody who's run away. Right? It's a runaway slave. And what this says is if there is a runaway slave, and you as a northerner know about this runaway slave and don't turn them in, then you become an accomplice. That means you're helping. You become a partner in the crime of theft. Okay? Of stealing that slave. Now notice that it's theft. It's considered stealing. Why is it considered stealing? Why are you an accomplice in theft if you're not reporting that escaped slave? Taylor?
Because slaves are considered a part of someone's property.
Because they're considered a part of someone's property. Now, where this is all kind of implied. Throughout the entire history of America, it's always implied and sort of just understood but unwritten that a slave is property. And they're functioning very much like property here in the Fugitive Slave Act and in all these other kinds of different laws and stuff like that of our nation for most of the history. But where it becomes explicit and where it becomes absolutely constitutional is during the Dred Scott case. Okay, the Dred Scott is a Supreme Court case where a slave, Dred Scott, was owned by a Southerner who moved to the north. Okay, that Southerner moves to the north and lived in the north, where the owner and presumably here the slave then too became a citizen of the north, of Illinois or Wisconsin. The owner then moved back to Missouri and died. And the slave sued for his freedom. He said, I have citizenship of Wisconsin, which is a free state, and my owner is dead, and so I should be able to move back to Wisconsin as a free man. That was the assumption. Okay? What the Dred Scott ruling says is it says that no, because a slave is property, when the doctor, I forget the owner's name, whoever owned Dred Scott, if he doesn't have any stipulations in his will about where Dred Scott goes, then Dred Scott gets passed on like all the other property to next of kin. Okay, and so basically what it says is you treat a slave just like any other property. It doesn't become that, let's say his name is George, okay? Dred Scott's owner, George, he also owned like a hammer and a screwdriver, right? His hammer and screwdriver are not citizens of Wisconsin and therefore get to go live free lives in Wisconsin because he lived in Wisconsin. This is the reasoning of a Supreme Court case. Now remember what a Supreme Court case does. How important a Supreme Court ruling is. What does a Supreme Court ruling do, Joey?
A Supreme Court ruling decides if something is constitutional or unconstitutional?
Yes. So if this has defined a slave as property, it's saying that the Constitution should be understood. We always need to interpret the Constitution to be saying that a slave is property. All right? It's saying that you need to read every part of the Constitution and every amendment to the Constitution in light of the fact that when somebody dies, the same thing happens to a slave that happens to all their other property. That's what this Dred Scott. That's how important this is. It's making the definition of a slave as property constitutional. Okay. All right, so the Dred Scott case and of course the Fugitive Slave Act more implicitly defines slaves as property. So we need that to understand as we go into this lesson. All right. The other thing that we need to understand is that what the South has done, or these southern states that seceded, okay, the Confederate States of America, of Americar? The Confederate States of America are an independent country. Now, they're not a region of the United States. They are the Confederate States of America, which is now a different country from the United States. Okay? So we need to have those two understandings nailed down. That they would almost say this isn't a civil war, okay? Because this isn't a war between two parts of the same country. We're our own country. Now, the North is fighting because they're disputing this. Okay? They're disputing that the South is its own country, but the South is defining itself as its own country. And they've said, we've already broken off and we're an independent nation. So that's an important, both of these two things are very, very important for one of the most important events in the war itself. Okay? So, how can I mention? All right, let's look at some instances of the Anaconda Plan. One of the first offensive battle of the war is the Battle of Bull Run, and the South calls it the Battle of Manassas. First Battle of Manassas. There are two battles there. South calls it First Manassas and Second Manassas. The North calls it First Bull Run and Second Bull Run, and we won, so we get to, our name sticks. Okay. Hey, I guess wait, that's what happened with the Merrimack and the Monitor too. Our name for the, yeah. Sweet. To the victor go the spoils, right? So, well, because the Merrimack is what the North renamed the USS Virginia. And so, anyway, so the Battle of Bull Run is an attack on railroad junctions. It's a railroad junction, okay, that's there in Manassas. Manassas only exists. It's not a big significant town, but it only exists because it is a railroad junction. And so what we do when you take out a railroad junction is you take out two different with one stone you kill two birds. This railroad line and this railroad line, and so that's what a junction is. If you're into railroads or drive in the country, then the word junction means something to you. Otherwise, maybe the best hope is after the Schoolhouse Rock song, Conjunction Junction. Yeah. What's your function? So that's the Battle of Bull Run. We could go in and look at this, and it's really exciting to look at all the strategy. And this is where Stonewall Jackson becomes a hero. Because he stands like a stone wall until more Southern troops can arrive, and we see the North trying to they kind of do like a they kind of do a pump fake here a little bit, right? They send a few troops down, and they're like, "Hey, troops, just head down there and just do some recon," but like real noisy, like, right? So these troops come down, and they're scoping out this little spot. Well, the next day they attack like up here, and so it's kind of like a pump fake. We want them to think we're attacking here, so go down and do some recon, right? And drop some pots on your toe while you're down there, and like, oh no, hey, shh, right? Because then they're gonna be, oh yeah, hey, we hear them over there, and then you come over here, and then but it doesn't work because Stonewall Jackson is a stone wall, and he stands until the reinforcements can arrive, and yeehaw. Okay, so that's the first Battle of Bull Run. It gives us a good illustration of what the North was trying to do unsuccessfully here in cutting off railroads. So that also introduces that railroads are extremely important, right? Railroads, almost as important as rivers, are the major means of moving those things around, moving those supplies, and moving men around. So you're not dependent on men marching from one place to another if you have railroads that go there. They can get there a lot faster if you can get them on a railroad car. And so this illustrates how important railroads are for this war. All right. Oh nope. I need the cut 3. I need two slides. So here, let's go over here, and I'll pop a new slide in there. So you can flip your paper over and get yourself some blank armadillo here. And let's fast forward. We could look at Shiloh, which is more Anaconda Plan. Shiloh was again a very, very small city. It's really just a church and a tiny little outpost. But what's important about it is it's very close to where a railroad junction, Corinth, Mississippi, is very, very close to the Tennessee River. All right, and so what's going on there? Cumberland River, is they're trying to gain control of. They've gained control of the Cumberland up to that point, and they're trying to gain control of the land up to that railroad junction as well. Because anything that would have gone up the Cumberland River, they would have gone onto rail there at Corinth, Mississippi. All right, so Shiloh would have illustrated that. It was also one of the bloodiest battles. It was certainly the bloodiest up to that point, and it is where Ulysses S. Grant becomes notable. He becomes everybody recognizes his heroship there. So we could look at Forts Henry and Donelson, which are river forts, forts on the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers, and where those two rivers are kind of close together, and so those give them control of the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers up to those points, and they open up really the fall of Nashville. So Nashville falls pretty quickly after Forts Henry and Donelson. And you're like, you keep saying this, but you're not writing anything down, so I don't need to know it. And I'm like, yeah, you don't, but I still want to say it. So, but just because you're writing down what I wrote up here doesn't mean you're taking good notes. I'll say it again. I've said it before. Right? So good notes are your explanations to yourself of what we've covered. Antietam is what we want to talk about, because Antietam is the armadillo. Okay, Antietam is the armadillo, but Antietam is in Maryland. All right, Antietam's in Maryland. So wait a second. Why would you ever have a battle if you have pure armadillo strategy going on? Why would you ever have a battle in the Union? Shouldn't all your battles be in the Confederate States? Because they should all be defensive, right? If you're fighting in the Union, then it means that the armadillo is scratching, and that's exactly what's happening here in Antietam. The armadillo is scratching. Now, they have had a series of victories because of the exemplary military wit of Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee is one of the greatest generals that our country has ever produced. Well, unfortunately, our country didn't produce; the Confederate States produced. But he's one of the greatest generals from American soil. And so several Lee victories before. Yep. And what you have in Antietam is a failed Confederate offensive, and so it kind of like they try their first offensive and it fails, so that's pretty demoralizing. Okay, you also have Lincoln. Lincoln is waiting for a victory because he wants to do something. He wants to make a proclamation. Okay, and if I make a proclamation, that's only going to be as important as how much I can back it up, right? Like, what if I said, "Hey, everybody, school's canceled tomorrow because of snow"?
Yes.
Right? If I said that,
It actually might not.
yeah. So how many of you guys are gonna be like, sweet? Well, you don't have school tomorrow anyway. So I'd have to say school is canceled on Wednesday because of snow. If I say school's canceled on Wednesday because of snow, how many of you are going to not set your alarms on Wednesday morning because I said that? Yeah. So here's the thing: do 7th grade history teachers make the decision as to whether or not school is canceled? No, they don't. They certainly don't make it 2 days before it's canceled, right? Now, however, if I just got off the phone and you hear me say, "Yeah, you have a good day too, Bill," okay? If you heard that, and then I said, "Hey, everybody, school is canceled on Wednesday because of snow," would you be more likely to believe what I said than if I just say, "Hey, guys, school's canceled on Wednesday"? Why? Lindsay? There you go. Right. So there's something that happened prior to that gives me a lot more credibility, right? It makes my little proclamation that school is canceled on Wednesday a lot more meaningful. If, he heard that, he's got authority now because Bill might be Mr. Rector. And so he might have heard from the headmaster himself that we're not going to have school on Wednesday. Unfortunately for y'all, your headmaster is from Iowa, and so he knows how to drive in the snow and on the ice. And so, he's like, "Come on, Texans, learn how to drive." I'm just kidding. He actually really looks forward to the opportunities to cancel school. Anyway. Antietam is Lincoln wants to make a proclamation, but he needs to be believable. And if the Union keeps losing battles, then his proclamation, everybody's going to be like, "Yeah, whatever." Like, okay, great. Good luck backing that up. Kind of like the Declaration of Independence, right? What does the Declaration of Independence mean if we don't win the war after it? It means nothing. It's just a piece of paper, right? It's like if I say, "I declare myself King of Flower Mound." Okay? Oh, good luck with that, crazy man. But if I declare myself King of Flower Mound, and then I'm like, "And here is my army that shall win this," and then suddenly there's this huge army behind me, then you're like, "Crazy man with army." Right? And then that's actually really scary. Okay? So that's a weird one. But what proclamation does Lincoln want to make after Antietam? Yes.
The Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, he wants to make that. So Lincoln wants a victory so he can make the Emancipation proclamation. Okay, and that's going to lend credibility to the proclamation itself. Oh, that is a tall I. I'll just go ahead. Proclamation? The Emancipation Proclamation? Yes.
What does that word say, like, after can?
Make. So, yeah, go ahead and if you're listening when we're saying it, and then if you just kind of put together what makes sense there. He wants a victory, so he can make, he can make the Emancipation Proclamation. So that lends credibility to the proclamation. All right. It's just going to have a lot more weight after that, right? So here's why we started with Dred Scott, okay, and the Confederate States of America being defined as an independent country, because this is the most important event that happens. This is going to shift the course of the war, all right? And here's why. Remember, why is the North fighting?
They want the Confederacy back.
Yeah, they want to bring the Confederacy back into Union. They want to preserve the Union. All right. Now you have guys that are in foxholes, that are getting legs blown off, that are starving, that are cold, that are having to fire at family members who are across the battlefield. That is not a fun thing to do. That's not an easy thing to motivate people to do. And they're doing that all for the noble cause of keeping these states in the Union who don't want to be in the Union. Is that an easy thing to convince people to fight for? No. But that's what they're fighting for. What the Emancipation Proclamation does is it makes the war about slavery. Now, hey, here's why you're going into that foxhole. Here's why you're starving, why you're freezing, why your leg is getting blown off, and why you're firing across the battlefield at family members, is because you're fighting to end slavery. Before this, they weren't fighting to end slavery. Now the North is actually fighting to end slavery, because if they win, all of the slaves in the Confederacy are free. Now, can a president do that? Can a president free slaves? He can. Why in the world did we have all this stuff about having to add new states if presidents could just emancipate slaves? What in the world? All right? Because what is a slave? A slave is property, right? And the Constitution says so. At least the Supreme Court tells us we need to read it that way. Can a president just take away property of his citizens?
Yeah.
No. Oh my goodness. Like that is the opposite of American. That is exactly why we have balance of power, that kind of thing. We don't want to give a president the ability to just take away the property of his citizens. That would be the worst kind of tyranny. We don't ever want to have a president that has that kind of power. But the president is the head of the military, right? He's the commander-in-chief. And are the slaves the property of his citizens? Let me ask it again with a different emphasis. Are slaves the property of his citizens? No. Because the Confederate States of America have declared themselves an enemy nation. Furthermore, they've declared war on the United States. So they're not just another nation, they're an enemy nation. Can an army confiscate the property of their enemy if that property is aiding in the war? Absolutely. Right? If there's a bridge that the enemy is using to move supplies, it's perfectly the president can command the bombing of that bridge. Right? He can confiscate if there are guns that are being used in a battle. the president can order that those guns be confiscated and used by the Union to fight back against them, right? The Emancipation Proclamation is Lincoln saying, okay, you guys want to define them as property? Fine. You guys want to define yourselves as an enemy nation? This is great. I'm going to take your definitions, and here's what I'm going to do with them. I'm going to confiscate your property. Not all of it, just the slaves. Quite literally, the Emancipation Proclamation is Lincoln confiscating the slaves from the Confederacy. So notice the Emancipation Proclamation doesn't do anything about border states, because those are his citizens. But he does confiscate the slaves of all the slaves in the Confederacy. Now, he still has to win the war for them to be free, but that's what the Emancipation Proclamation does. All right?